The galaxy had been at peace for centuries. A fragile truce, maintained by the great empires that had risen and fallen, now rested on the bones of those ancient civilizations. But peace was an illusion, one that the galaxy was about to shatter. It began with a signal. A whisper lost in the vastness of space, a signal from the edges of known space. The crew of the Lion Shield, an aging warship at the fringes of the Terran Empire, thought it was a malfunction, a glitch in the system. But the signal was insistent, too regular to be dismissed. It came from a dead star system, one long thought abandoned. Captain Callum Voss stared at the starboard viewscreen of his ship as it flickered with static, then revealed the distorted image of a dying planet. No one knew it, but the Lion Shield had been tasked with monitoring this sector, one of the few quiet corners left of a galaxy overwhelmed by galactic warfare. A relic of a time when survival meant constant vigilance. The Terran Empire had made its home among the stars, a powerful force that controlled vast swaths of space. Yet its might had been on the wane in recent years. Corruption had seeped into its heart, and bureaucrats had become more concerned with personal gains than military expansion. The empire was weakening, divided by internal squabbles, while the threat of the unknown loomed closer. "Captain, we've locked on to the signal," reported Lieutenant Mira Dusk, standing at the sensor console. Her voice, usually calm and collected, held a trace of unease. "It's coming from the planet's surface." "Is it a distress signal?" Callum asked, his eyes narrowing. "Unclear. There's no formal distress code, but it's definitely coming from a synthetic source. Someone, or something, wants to make contact." Callum's instincts kicked in. The Lion Shield was not a rescue ship, and this wasn't a mission to answer any distress call. But there was something about the signal that gnawed at his thoughts. A feeling in his gut told him that whatever awaited them was no ordinary encounter. The Empire had seen its share of conflicts. Pirates, raiders, rogue states, even alien threats. But nothing like this. It wasn't just a matter of firepower, or strategy, or sheer force of numbers. It was something different, something more terrifying. Callum wasn't sure why, but he sensed that this was a battle not just for survival, but for the very soul of their existence. "Prepare a landing party," Callum ordered. "Lieutenant Dusk, take a team with you. I'll stay here and monitor from the bridge." Lieutenant Dusk nodded, her brow furrowed with concern. She gathered a small team of engineers and soldiers, some of the finest on the Lion Shield. They suited up, prepared for a hostile environment, but still unaware of the true dangers that awaited them below. As the shuttle descended toward the surface, Callum watched the ship's monitor, eyes fixed on the planet's surface. The planet had once been a thriving colony, but now its surface was scarred, burnt out in places and devoid of life. The signal was almost too precise, too calculated. Something was pulling them in, guiding them to this forgotten world. "Are you sure this is right, Captain?" asked Ensign Jax, a young officer who had been with the Lion Shield for only a few months. His voice was shaky as he glanced at the screen. "This looks wrong." Callum didn't reply immediately. He watched the descent, the way the shuttle's shadow crossed over the barren landscape, obscuring the scarred features below. The shuttle's engines thrummed against the dead silence of the planet, their only companion in this lonely place. Nothing but dust and echoes. As the shuttle landed, dust clouds swirled, and the faint hiss of atmospheric pressure filled the air. Dusk and her team disembarked, weapons at the ready, scanning the area. No life forms. No immediate signs of danger. But something was wrong. They could feel it. The air was thick, heavy with a sense of foreboding. "Dusk, this is Voss," Callum's voice crackled over the comms. "Report in once you've confirmed the source of the signal." "Acknowledged, Captain." Dusk's voice was tight. "We'll be in touch." As the team moved forward, their boots crunching on the cracked earth, the signal grew louder in their headsets, like a whisper just out of reach. The ruins of a once great city loomed ahead, dark towers standing tall, their skeletal frames casting long shadows across the wasteland. But just as they neared the heart of the city, the signal intensified. And then it happened. The ground shook. Dusk's team froze, looking up at the sky as something massive blotted out the stars. A fleet of warships, black as void, appeared in orbit above the planet. They weren't Terran ships. They weren't anything Callum had seen before. The signal had been a trap and they had walked right into it. The sky above them exploded with the sound of distant thunder as the massive ships hovered ominously above the barren planet. Dusk's heart raced, her breath quickening as she turned to her team. "Get back to the shuttle, now." Her voice was sharp, the urgency clear. The ground trembled beneath them as the alien ships, black and angular, deployed their massive weapons. They had no insignia, no markings to indicate who they were, but their hostile presence was undeniable. The Lion Shield crew had seen their share of threats, but nothing like this. These ships were unlike any known species or empire. Callum Voss watched in disbelief as the massive warships appeared on his screen. The Lion Shield was not equipped to face something like this. The ship was powerful, a relic of older Terran designs, but it was only one vessel. And these ships, whatever they were, outnumbered them. Captain, we're under attack. Ensign Jax's voice broke through the bridge's tense silence, his hand hovering over the weapons console. Shields are holding, but the power drain is massive. The Lion Shield rocked violently, sending the crew lurching forward in their seats. A direct hit to the outer hull. Sparks flew from the control panels and emergency lights flickered to life across the bridge. Raise shields to full, Callum barked, his mind racing. He needed to think. They needed to buy time to retreat or find a way to fight back. But it was clear the enemy was prepared for something like this. The Terran Empire had its fleet, but these warships, these unknown ships, were unlike anything they'd ever encountered. Lieutenant Dusk, what's your status? Callum said, tapping the comms. The wait for a response felt like an eternity. Every second counted. Dusk's voice crackled back, garbled with static but still audible. We're under fire. The transmission was cut off abruptly, and for a moment the bridge fell silent. Damn it. Callum slammed his fist against the armrest of his command chair. He couldn't afford to lose his team now. Not after they'd come so far. Captain, we've got multiple energy signatures from the enemy ships, Lieutenant Velder, the tactical officer, reported, her fingers flying across her console. They're not launching conventional weapons. These are something else. Energy beams, antimatter projectiles. They're designed to destabilize our systems. Can we disable their weapons? Callum asked, leaning forward. We can try, but it's going to take time. These ships are armed with technology we've never seen before. And we're outnumbered. A cold sense of dread washed over the captain. The enemy wasn't just superior in numbers, they had advanced weaponry technology far beyond what the Terran Empire had ever developed. How were they supposed to fight back against this? Suddenly, the transmission from the surface came back to life. Captain, we've located the source of the signal. Dusk's voice was faint but urgent. It's coming from an underground facility beneath the city. We're making our way there now. Can you confirm what you're dealing with down there? Callum's voice crackled with tension. There was a brief pause. We're not sure what we're dealing with yet, but it's not just a facility, it's a weapon. A weapon of unimaginable power. Before Callum could respond, the communication cut off again. The silence that followed felt like the calm before a storm, and his pulse quickened. Velder, can we initiate a jump? Get us out of here? Callum asked, his mind racing for a solution. It's possible, but we'd need a safe lane. Those ships above are already blocking most of our exit routes. And even if we do make it out, the damage to our shields is significant. Captain, came a voice from the comms officer. The enemy ships, they're initiating a wide-scale attack pattern. They're targeting the Lion Shield directly. We have seconds before. The ship lurched again, another violent hit to the hull, this time causing the entire bridge to shudder. Sparks flew across the floor. Emergency alarms blared and the lights flickered wildly. All hands brace for impact. Callum shouted, grabbing onto the console in front of him. The Lion Shield was falling apart at the seams, and there was nothing they could do to stop it. The unknown ships had found them, and they were relentless in their assault. The bridge was chaos. Crew members scrambled to maintain control, but Callum's thoughts were elsewhere. Dusk and her team had discovered something that could turn the tide of this war. But he wasn't sure if they'd be able to reach it in time. The floor beneath him trembled again, and through the viewport, Callum saw the glint of enemy fire arcing toward them. The Lion Shield was barely holding its ground. We need to get out of here. Now, Callum muttered to himself. The plan was clear, survival. But he needed the rest of his crew alive to make it happen. He needed to get to Dusk. As the Lion Shield fought to stay in the fight, Callum made his decision. He had to gamble everything. The weapon on the planet's surface could be the only hope for their survival. There was no turning back now. The Lion Shield shook again, a deep, bone-rattling tremor that reverberated through the entire ship. Sparks flew from consoles and the overhead lights flickered ominously. Captain Callum Voss gripped the edge of his chair, his knuckles white as he stared at the viewscreen. The enemy ships above the planet were relentless, raining fire down upon them with frightening precision. We're losing power, Captain, Velder, the tactical officer, said through gritted teeth. The main reactor's been hit. We can't keep this up much longer. Callum's gaze remained fixed on the screen. The vast warships above were merciless, their weapons designed to tear apart everything in their path. They had no intention of retreating. But then, amidst the chaos, the message from Lieutenant Dusk's team returned, a faint, static-laden voice breaking through the interference. "Captain, we've reached the facility." Dusk's voice sounded strained but determined. "It's not just a weapon. It's a power source, one that could wipe out entire fleets. We found something inside. Something alive." The blood in Callum's veins turned to ice. Alive? What in the name of the Empire could possibly be alive in a facility like this? "Lieutenant, you need to get out of there now," Callum barked, voice tight with urgency. He shot a glance at Velder. "Can we get a lock on their location?" "We can't get a precise lock through the interference, Captain," Velder replied, her voice strained. "We're getting weak signals from the surface. But it's chaotic down there. Too much interference to get a clear trace." Callum's mind raced. He needed that weapon, whatever it was, to have any chance of surviving the onslaught from above. But sending his crew deeper into an unknown facility, especially with something alive down there, was a gamble, a dangerous one. But what choice did he have? "We're pulling back, Captain," Dusk's voice crackled through again. "There's something moving inside the facility." "I don't think we can." The transmission cut off abruptly, replaced by only the shrill hiss of static. "Damn it." Callum slammed his fist into the armrest. The uncertainty gnawed at him, but he had no time to waste. If they didn't act soon, they would be destroyed. "Velder, give me everything we've got," he commanded, his voice cold and resolute. "Engage emergency thrusters. Get us to the planet's surface. We'll rendezvous with Lieutenant Dusk's team and we'll extract them. Now." "Aye, Captain," Velder responded immediately. She toggled the controls, sending the Lion Shield into a violent maneuver, the ship groaning under the strain. The sudden acceleration sent the crew reeling, but they had no time to think about that now. The battle above them had only just begun, and the clock was ticking. As the Lion Shield descended toward the surface, the incoming fire from the alien warships intensified. Each shot that struck the hull sent violent tremors throughout the ship, but somehow the shields held. Callum didn't let up on the controls, guiding the ship with a precision born of years of experience. "Captain, the surface readings are fluctuating wildly," Velder warned, eyes darting between the screens. "I'm detecting massive heat signatures. Something's destabilizing beneath the surface." Callum's heart skipped a beat. Whatever was happening down there, it was escalating. But they had no choice but to push forward. "Prepare for landing," Callum ordered, his voice unwavering. "We need to get to Lieutenant Dusk now." The Lion Shield's descent slowed as the planet's surface loomed larger, the skeletal remains of the city now clearly visible. Dust and ash swirled in the air, making the ruins seem like the remnants of a forgotten world. A world that had, until now, seemed entirely devoid of life. But something was alive down there. Something powerful. The shuttle bay doors opened and Callum felt his pulse quicken. This was it. The team was already on the surface, but the true danger lay within the heart of the city, deep underground. "Engage the landing thrusters," Callum commanded, gripping the console tightly as the ship descended toward the wreckage. The Lion Shield touched down with a jarring thud, its landing gear absorbing the impact. The engines whined as they powered down, and for a moment, the only sound was the whir of the ship's systems settling into place. "We're here," Velder said, standing up and securing her blaster at her side. "Time to move." Callum nodded, his mind already racing. They had to find Dusk's team. They had to reach the weapon. And they had to do it before the alien warships above wiped them from the stars. With a sharp exhale, Callum tapped his comms. "Lieutenant Dusk, we're on the surface. Where are you?" A moment of silence passed. Then Dusk's voice returned, this time louder, clearer, but no less urgent. "Captain, you need to hurry. The facility, it's reacting to our presence. There's something happening down here, something we don't understand." Dusk's voice was strained, her words nearly lost in the static. "We've triggered something." Before Callum could reply, the ground beneath them groaned. The sky above darkened further, the looming alien ships seeming to draw closer, their guns charging once again. The weapon was awakening. And time was running out. The ground beneath Callum's feet trembled again, more violently this time. The Lion Shield's engines were still humming faintly, but it felt as if the entire planet was waking from a long, slumbering nightmare. The air around them seemed to thicken, as if the very atmosphere was reacting to their presence. Callum tightened his grip on the armrest, his eyes fixed on the monitor displaying the landscape of the ruined city outside. The dust was starting to settle, but a strange heat shimmered from the depths of the planet's surface. His mind raced. "The weapon's activating," Velder murmured from beside him, her eyes glued to the tactical screen. "Something's wrong, Captain. The energy readings are spiking. It's like the facility is drawing power from the planet's core." "We don't have much time," Callum said, his voice grim. "The enemy ships above are readying another strike. We have to find Dusk and we have to get to that weapon before they do." The shuttle bay doors of the Lion Shield slid open with a soft hiss. The team, fully armed and armored, stood ready to disembark. Callum's eyes swept across the crew, Velder, Mira Dusk's second in command, and a squad of battle-hardened soldiers, all ready to risk everything for a chance at survival. Callum stepped forward, the weight of his decision settling over him. They were walking into the unknown, and every instinct screamed that this would be their most dangerous mission yet. But the alternative, standing still, waiting to be annihilated, was worse. "I'm leading this mission," Callum said firmly, his voice cutting through the tension. "Velder, you're with me. We'll move quickly to the facility. The rest of you hold the perimeter. No one gets in or out without us." There were no objections. The team moved with precision, falling into their formation as they headed for the shuttle's hatch. The air outside was hot and heavy, the distant rumble of the alien warships above reminding them of the grim reality they faced. The ground was cracked and scarred, with no sign of life, yet the strange heat emanating from the planet's depths suggested something was stirring, something that would change everything. As they moved deeper into the city, the once proud towers now looked like tombstones. The ruins, ravaged by time and neglect, seemed to hum with energy. But the silence was unnerving, a haunting stillness that made every footstep sound like thunder. Callum's thoughts flickered to Lieutenant Dusk. Her team was somewhere ahead, but the closer they got to the facility, the more the air seemed to vibrate like the planet itself was holding its breath. Then, just as they neared the heart of the city, the ground shook again. This time it wasn't just a tremor. A low rumble emanated from beneath them, vibrating through the bones of the ruined structures. "Get down!" Callum shouted, pushing Velder and the rest of the team into cover. He barely had time to react when the ground in front of them exploded in a burst of blinding light and smoke. The earth cracked wide open, and from the depths of the planet came a sound that could only be described as a scream, an ear-splitting, unnatural wail that seemed to echo across the very fabric of reality. It was as if the planet itself was alive, and in pain. "Dusk," Callum said, his voice barely a whisper as he stepped forward, heart racing. "Dusk, respond." Nothing. The comms were dead. "This is bad," Velder said under her breath, her voice trembling. "Whatever's happening down there, it's not just some weapon. This is a living thing. It's connected to the planet." Suddenly the air around them grew thick with static. Then, from the depths of the wreckage ahead, came a voice, faint at first but growing clearer. "Captain?" It was Dusk's voice, strained, panicked. "Lieutenant," Callum shouted. "Where are you?" There was a long pause, then Dusk's voice returned, barely audible. It's not what we thought. The weapon is a neural nexus. It's alive. We've triggered something we shouldn't have." Before Dusk could continue, the ground split open beneath their feet, and from the crack in the earth, something rose, a massive structure, twisting and shifting like a living organism, its surface glowing with an eerie, pulsing light. It seemed to be a fusion of organic and synthetic materials, a bizarre melding of flesh and metal, all encased in a glowing cocoon. This was the weapon. But it was not just a weapon. It was a mind. A consciousness. "Get back," Callum ordered, grabbing Velder by the arm. But it was too late. The ground continued to split open, and massive tendrils of energy surged upward, crackling with raw power. The neural nexus, the weapon, was awakening. And it wasn't just a weapon of destruction. It was a weapon of control. With a sudden burst of energy, the tendrils lashed out, sending a shockwave through the area. The team was thrown off their feet, tumbling to the ground as the air pulsed with unnatural power. Callum struggled to regain his footing, his mind racing. The Nexus was alive, and it was aware of them. But there was something else. A strange feeling in the back of his mind, a sense of familiarity. It was as if this weapon, this living mind, was calling to him. The connection was undeniable. And in that moment, Callum realized the terrifying truth. The weapon wasn't just meant to destroy. It was meant to dominate. And it was choosing its next target. The pulse of energy from the Nexus reverberated through the ground like the heartbeat of a sleeping giant awakening. The air was thick, oppressive, as if the very atmosphere was pressing in on them, forcing the team to their knees. The power emanating from the Nexus was staggering, filling the space with a strange, almost hypnotic hum that made Callum's head spin. "Captain, we have to move." Velder's voice cut through the haze of disorientation, dragging him back to reality. The shockwave had knocked them off balance, but they couldn't afford to stay down. Not with the Nexus now fully awakened. Callum blinked, shaking his head to clear the fog in his mind. He pushed himself to his feet, his heart pounding in his chest. The team was scattered, each of them recovering from the blast. But one thing was clear: this wasn't just a weapon. It was something more, something ancient and alive. "Get up, everyone!" Callum shouted, his voice hoarse but commanding. "We need to reach dusk. Now." The Nexus, a massive organic structure, towered before them, its tendrils of energy reaching into the sky like dark, grasping fingers. The surface of the weapon shifted constantly, like it was breathing. At the center of it all, a faint, eerie glow pulsed, as though it were the beating heart of the facility itself. The air hummed with its power, the ground trembling beneath their boots. The rest of the team scrambled to their feet, eyes wide with a mix of awe and terror. They had no idea what they were dealing with, but Callum knew that they had to act fast. If they didn't get to Dusk's team, if they didn't find out what this weapon really was, they might all be lost. With every step they took, the pulsating energy from the Nexus seemed to grow stronger, more intense. It was like the planet itself was alive, reacting to their presence. And as they neared the center of the facility, they realized the truth. This was no ordinary weapon. The moment they stepped into the central chamber, the air around them thickened, and a voice, deep and ancient, echoed in their minds. It was as though the weapon itself was speaking directly to them. "You are not welcome here." The voice resonated within Callum's skull, reverberating through his very bones. He staggered back, gripping his head as the pressure built, threatening to crush his skull. He wasn't sure if the others felt it, but it was clear that the weapon was aware of them, aware of their intrusion. It had been dormant for centuries, perhaps longer, and now it was stirring. "Dusk!" Callum shouted, his voice strained. "Where are you?" There was no response. The silence that followed was deafening. He felt the connection between them, between the weapon and himself, growing stronger, pulling at the edges of his consciousness. It was as if the Nexus was trying to probe his mind, to understand him, to connect. But just as the pressure became unbearable, a crackling noise came through the comms. Dusk's voice, distorted but unmistakable, rang out. "Captain, don't let it control you. It's trying to merge with your mind, with all of us." Callum's breath caught in his throat. Merging? That could only mean one thing. The weapon wasn't just a tool of destruction, it was a parasite, a sentient being capable of infiltrating minds, of taking control. It wasn't just trying to destroy the Lion Shield, it was trying to take them. "We have to destroy it, Captain," Velder shouted, her voice barely audible over the increasing hum of the weapon's power. "Before it's too late. We can't let it spread." The words hit Callum like a slap to the face, and he snapped back to reality. Velder was right. If they didn't stop it now, if they didn't sever the connection, they would all be lost. But how could they destroy something that was alive, that was so deeply connected to the planet itself? "We need to find Dusk's team," Callum ordered, his voice cutting through the tension. "They're the key to stopping this." The team moved quickly, pushing through the shifting walls of the facility, which seemed to bend and warp with every passing second. The very architecture of the place was alive, changing with their every step. It was a place of alien design, a place built for one purpose: to contain and control the power of the weapon. As they pushed deeper into the heart of the facility, the air grew even thicker, and the presence of the Nexus felt more oppressive, more inescapable. The walls seemed to pulse as if alive with energy, closing in on them. Callum could feel the weapon's consciousness drawing closer, its presence suffocating. But then, just as they rounded a corner, they found them. Lieutenant Dusk and her team were kneeling before the Nexus, their bodies slack, their eyes wide and unseeing. Their hands twitched involuntarily, their minds clearly at war with the weapon that had already begun to take hold. Callum rushed to Dusk's side, shaking her by the shoulders. Her eyes fluttered open, and for a moment she seemed to recognize him. But then her expression blanked and she whispered, it's inside all of us." Callum looked to the others. The weapon had already begun to merge with Dusk's team. The Nexus wasn't just trying to control them, it was trying to consume them, to bind their minds to its own. It was a living mind and it wanted more. "Dusk, we need to get out of here," Callum said urgently. "We need to shut it down." But even as he spoke, the ground beneath them began to tremble once more. The air was charged with static, the energy from the Nexus reaching a fever pitch. The weapon was no longer a mere threat. It was awake, and it was now fully aware of their presence. It was coming for them. And it was coming for the Empire. The tension in the chamber was palpable. The weapon, the Nexus, throbbed with an energy so powerful it seemed to distort the very air around them. The walls of the facility shifted, groaning like the bones of some ancient beast stirring from its slumber. Callum could feel the oppressive weight of the weapon's presence pressing down on them, suffocating, pushing against his chest, forcing him to fight for each breath. Lieutenant Dusk was still slumped against the floor, her body twitching as though it were caught in some unholy struggle. Her eyes were wide, pupils dilated, yet there was no recognition in them. She had become a vessel, her mind tethered to the living Nexus just like her team. Dusk. Callum's voice broke through the haze, urgent and raw. He shook her harder this time, but there was no response. Her body twitched again and her lips parted, whispering a single word, "It's too late." A chill ran down Callum's spine. The weapon wasn't just trying to control them, it was infecting them, weaving itself into their minds. And it was succeeding. Dusk wasn't just under its influence, she had become a part of it. "We need to get them out of here," Velder said, her voice tight with frustration. "If it's merging with their minds, we're running out of time. It's already too powerful." Callum's thoughts raced. Every instinct told him they had to destroy the Nexus. But how? They had no idea how to counter such a force. It was more than a weapon, it was a consciousness, alive, aware, and infinitely more dangerous than they had ever imagined. Suddenly the ground trembled beneath them, sending vibrations up Callum's spine. The air seemed to thrum with anticipation, and a deep, resonating hum filled the chamber. The Nexus was reacting to their presence, like a beast stirring from a deep slumber, and its hunger was growing. "We don't have much time," Mira Dusk's second-in-command, Sergeant Aylin, said, her voice low but urgent. "Whatever's happening, the Nexus is accelerating. It's growing stronger. We can't keep it out of our heads for much longer." Callum clenched his fists, the weight of the situation pressing down on him like a vice. He looked around the chamber, searching for something, anything, that could help. Then his gaze fell on the center of the Nexus. The pulsing light at its core was drawing him in, almost like a magnetic pull. His mind seemed to connect with it, but he fought against it. "Don't give in," he told himself. "Don't let it take you." It was then that he noticed something, a faint, almost imperceptible flicker at the very heart of the Nexus. Amidst the pulsing energy there was a shape. A distortion like a crack in the very fabric of reality itself. Something was wrong. It wasn't just the weapon, it was the way it was interacting with the planet, with the entire system. "Captain, look!" Velder shouted, pointing toward the center of the chamber. "There's something in the Nexus. I think it's trying to merge the weapon with the planet itself." The realization hit Callum like a lightning bolt. The weapon wasn't just linked to the planet, it was feeding off it, using the very core of the world to power itself. And it wasn't just a weapon anymore. It was becoming the planet. A deadly symbiosis was forming. The weapon, the Nexus, was in the process of merging with the world, transforming it into something else. Something alive. Something monstrous. Callum's heart raced. They had to stop it. But how? "Velder, Aylin, we need to break the connection," Callum said, his voice firm. "The Nexus is controlling them through the planetary core. If we can sever the power supply, it should destabilize the Nexus, at least long enough for us to get Dusk and the others out of here." "Captain, are you sure we can do that?" Velder asked, her voice laced with disbelief. "The entire planet is resonating with it. Even if we destroy the power source, it might not be enough to stop the Nexus. We might just make it worse." Callum met her gaze, unflinching. "We don't have a choice. We're either going to fight to save them, or we're going to die here." He turned back to the Nexus. The pulsing light at its heart seemed to pulse in time with his own heartbeat. He felt it again, the tug, the pull of the weapon's consciousness trying to invade his mind. His skin crawled as the presence grew stronger, like fingers slipping through his thoughts. The weapon was trying to consume him, to make him part of it. But he fought back. "Not today. We'll destroy the core," Callum continued, his voice steady. "We'll overload its energy. That should sever the link. It's our best shot." Velder nodded, though the uncertainty in her eyes remained. "Then let's make it count." The team moved quickly, knowing that every second mattered. Callum led them toward the central chamber, his eyes locked on the now warped, shifting mass of the Nexus. The once organic walls of the facility were now pulsing with unnatural energy, the very structure of the place alive with power. As they approached, Callum could feel the atmosphere growing denser, more suffocating. The Nexus was pulling everything toward it, trying to draw them in. "Stay focused," Callum ordered. "We get to the power core and we destroy it, no hesitation." But just as they were about to reach the heart of the Nexus, a sudden shift occurred. The walls around them shuddered violently, and the floor cracked open. A loud, grinding noise echoed through the chamber as the Nexus unleashed its final assault. Callum barely had time to react. The air was thick with energy, and in an instant the tendrils of the Nexus shot out, wrapping around him, around his team, pulling them toward the core. "No!" Callum roared, struggling against the powerful force that seemed to take hold of his every limb, his every thought. The weapon was too strong. Then from somewhere behind him, Dusk's voice cut through the chaos, barely recognizable. "Captain, must now?" And in that moment, Callum knew what he had to do. He had no choice. The time for hesitation had passed. The weapon had to be stopped, even if it meant sacrificing everything. The force of the Nexus power was overwhelming. The tendrils wrapped around Callum like chains of pure energy, pulling him closer to the pulsing core at the heart of the weapon. His body screamed with the pressure, every muscle straining, every nerve alight with an unbearable surge of power. The Nexus was inside him, its presence clawing at his mind, trying to twist his thoughts, to make him part of it. But through the suffocating darkness, a voice cut through the fog of his mind. Dusk's voice, strained and broken, reached him like a lifeline. "You have to destroy the core." The words snapped Callum back to reality. Destroy the core. The power source, the very heart of the Nexus, was what connected everything. It was the only thing that could stop it. But the weapon was no longer a mere tool of destruction. It was something alive, something sentient. And it was fighting back with everything it had. He could feel it now, its mind reaching out to him. It wasn't just controlling the planet or the crew, it was trying to consume them, to absorb their thoughts, to merge with them completely. His thoughts felt like they were slipping, his consciousness blurring as the Nexus wrapped its tendrils around him. "Don't let it win," he thought desperately, fighting the pull, the dark weight that threatened to swallow him. "Velder. Aelin," he shouted, though his voice sounded distant and hollow. "Get to the core. I'll hold it off." "We're with you, Captain." Velder's voice pierced the haze. She and Aelin fought their way through the energy tendrils, pushing forward with grim determination. The team had rallied behind him, their resolve steeled despite the overwhelming odds. The weapon may have been ancient, it may have been powerful, but humanity had fought against worse. And they were still standing. The walls around them shuddered violently, and the air seemed to crackle with energy. The room felt alive, the Nexus warping reality itself. Every breath was a battle. Every step forward was a struggle against the sheer weight of the weapon's power. But they pressed on, undeterred. "We're almost there, Captain," Aelin called out. She was panting, her face grim as she fought to move forward against the overwhelming energy. "Just a little more." Callum nodded, sweat dripping down his brow as he tried to push the thoughts of the Nexus out of his mind. It was trying to merge with him, to overpower him. He could feel it, its influence like a parasite digging deeper into his mind. But he refused to let it take hold. The crackling energy around him intensified. The Nexus was reacting to their presence, and in its desperate attempt to break them, it began to tear the fabric of the room itself. The walls began to twist and warp, shifting like organic matter, bending in ways that defied logic. Then suddenly there was a sound, a sickening, grinding sound, as though the entire facility were being crushed by the weight of the weapon. The core of the Nexus pulsed brighter, and in the flickering light, Callum saw it, the heart of the weapon. It was not a machine, not a simple reactor. It was a mass of organic material, coiled and pulsing, encased in a shell of dark, metallic plating. A fusion of flesh and metal, alive with its own malevolent energy. The Nexus wasn't just powered by the planet, it was a living organism, and its heart was the key. And that heart was now aware of them. The room trembled violently as the core began to react to their presence, tendrils of energy shooting out in all directions. Callum's vision blurred, and he struggled to maintain his focus. He could feel the Nexus pulling at his mind, forcing him to look at it, to see the truth of what it was, to understand its power. "No," he thought, pushing against the wave of thoughts that threatened to overwhelm him. "I won't be part of you." With a final, desperate roar, Callum tore himself away from the grasp of the weapon. His body racked with pain as he shoved the last vestiges of its influence aside. He could feel the others near him, struggling just as hard, but they were not alone. "We're here, Captain." Velder's voice was a lifeline. She and Aelin were at the core, their hands shaking as they reached out to activate the destruction sequence. "We've got it, just hold on." Callum gritted his teeth, forcing his mind to focus. He could see the glowing core, its tendrils writhing in a frenzy, as if sensing its impending death. It was trying to fight back, trying to stop them, but it was too late. "Now!" Callum shouted. With one final push, Velder and Aelin triggered the charge. The energy surged outward with a deafening roar. The walls of the facility cracked as the blast radiated outward, the Nexus itself writhing in agony as the core began to overload. The entire structure shuddered, the very air around them shimmering with raw, unbridled power. Callum felt a moment of weightlessness as the shockwave tore through the room, the Nexus power cracking apart. And then there was nothing. The silence that followed was deafening. Callum blinked, his eyes adjusting to the sudden stillness. The energy that had once pulsed through the facility was gone. The air, once thick with power, was now eerily calm. For a moment no one moved. Then Velder was the first to speak, her voice hoarse but filled with relief. "We did it," she said, looking around the shattered room. "It's over." Callum exhaled sharply, his body shaking with exhaustion. The weight of the battle, of the mission, was finally starting to sink in. They had succeeded. The Nexus was gone. The weapon was destroyed. But as he looked over at the team, at Dusk, Aelin, and Velder, he couldn't shake the feeling that their victory had come at a terrible cost. The weapon was gone, but the galaxy had changed. Something ancient, something alive had been awakened, and Callum knew the battle was far from over. The warships above would be back. And this time they wouldn't be alone. The Empire of Warships had just begun. The aftermath of the battle left the facility in ruins. The Nexus, the sentient weapon that had threatened to consume them, was no more. The once ominous hum of power that had filled the air was gone, leaving an eerie silence that seemed to linger in the cracks and broken walls of the structure. Callum stood at the center of the wreckage, his mind still spinning from the sheer intensity of the battle. His body was bruised and battered, the weight of the fight pressing down on him. His crew too bore the marks of the battle, exhausted but alive. They had survived, but Callum couldn't shake the feeling that something far more dangerous was lurking just beyond their reach. "Captain," Velder's voice broke through his thoughts, a note of concern in it. She had been scanning the horizon, her eyes narrowed as she studied the empty sky. "The battle's over, but I'm not sure we've won." Callum frowned, following her gaze. The distant stars were cold and indifferent, the silent sentinels of space that had always been there. But something had changed. A ripple, a disturbance, as though the fabric of the galaxy had been altered forever. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it was there. "We did what we had to do," Callum replied, though the doubt gnawed at him. "The weapon is gone and Dusk's team is safe. For now, that's all that matters." Dusk, still recovering from the influence of the Nexus, was now sitting with Aelin and the others, her eyes heavy with the weight of what they had just endured. It was clear she was struggling, physically, mentally, and emotionally. The Nexus had left its mark on her, on all of them. The team was lucky to be alive, but they had been irrevocably changed by the experience. "It wasn't just the weapon," Dusk murmured as Callum approached, her voice distant and hollow. "The Nexus, it was only a part of something much bigger. We've only scratched the surface." Callum stared at her, the words sinking in slowly. "Bigger? What could possibly be larger than the weapon they had just destroyed?" "You're saying the weapon was just the beginning?" Callum asked, the tension creeping back into his voice. Dusk nodded slowly, her eyes shadowed. "I've seen fragments of the data, things I didn't fully understand until now. The weapon was built as part of something much larger. Something ancient. It wasn't just created by the species that designed it. It was drawn here. And now that it's awake, something else is coming. Something we haven't even begun to comprehend." Callum's gut clenched. He had always known that the universe held countless mysteries, many of them dangerous. But what Dusk was suggesting, that the Nexus was just a small piece of a much larger puzzle, was something far more insidious than he had imagined. "If what you're saying is true," Velder's voice trailed off as she shook her head, her face tight with disbelief, "then we've made a mistake. We've destroyed the weapon, but we've only set something else in motion. That's not all." Dusk's voice grew darker. "The Nexus wasn't just trying to connect with us, it was trying to send a signal. A call. A beacon for something much worse. And that signal has gone out into the deep of space." There was a long silence as the weight of Dusk's words settled over them. The realization hit Callum like a thunderclap. They hadn't just been fighting for their survival, they had unwittingly sent a message, a signal to an enemy they couldn't even fathom. Suddenly the comms crackled to life, interrupting the quiet. "Captain, this is the Lion Shield." The voice of Commander Xander came through, clipped and urgent. "We've received an incoming transmission. It's not like anything we've ever encountered before. We don't know what it means, but we need to talk now." Callum's blood ran cold. He turned to Dusk, his mind racing. "What is it? What's happening?" Dusk's face paled, and she exchanged a tense look with Aelin. "The transmission," she said slowly, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's coming from outside the galaxy." Callum's mind spun. Outside the galaxy? They had barely survived the weapon's awakening, and now something even larger was reaching out to them from the unknown corners of space. He turned to the others. "Prepare to move out. We need to rendezvous with the Lion Shield, now." The journey back to the Lion Shield was quick, the silence between the crew members heavy with the dread of what they might be facing. As they boarded the warship, Callum could feel the weight of his decisions pressing down on him. Had they truly won? Or had they just uncovered the first step in a much darker conflict? When they reached the command deck, Commander Xander was waiting for them, his expression grave. "Captain," Xander said, his voice tight. "You need to see this." He gestured to the holoscreen in front of them. A transmission, a strange series of symbols and images, flickered on the screen. It was unlike anything Callum had ever seen, alien, ancient, and cryptic. The symbols danced across the screen, seeming to shift and change in ways that defied logic. Callum's heart raced. Whatever this was, it wasn't just a distress signal. It was something far more dangerous. "What is it?" Velder asked, her voice tight with unease. Xander exchanged a look with Callum. "We think it's a warning. The message? It's not from the same species that created the weapon. It's something older. Something more powerful. And it's heading toward us." Dusk stepped forward, her face pale as she stared at the screen. "I've seen this before. These symbols, they're not just warnings. They're instructions. It's a map. A map to something." Callum's breath caught in his throat. A map to what? But Dusk's gaze remained fixed on the transmission, her eyes filled with a mixture of dread and fascination. "To the source. The origin of the Nexus. And if we don't stop it," she shook her head slowly, "we will be nothing more than a footnote in their history." A chill settled over the room. Callum knew that what lay ahead would not be just another fight, it would be a war on a scale they had never imagined. An enemy they couldn't see. A force that had been waiting, dormant, for millennia. And now it was coming. The Empire of Warships had indeed only just begun.